Much of political and ministerial work is, of course, very hard and humdrum. But there are moments when it becomes exciting, and the transfer of power is one of them. When a party is defeated in an election, when a prime minister or a minister dies or resigns, and therefore on the 16th of March 1976, when the cabinet gathered to hear of Harold Wilson's resignation, it was such a day. Of course, there have been rumours that Harold would go for ages. Indeed, he told me that he would go on his 60th birthday, but I didn't believe him, because people who say they're going to retire very often say it in order to get others to say to them, "Oh, carry on, we really need you." But Marcia Williams, who'd worked with him for years, had been going around saying he was bored with politics. He'd told me that he might be going, but I found it hard to believe. But when the cabinet met that morning, we heard the news from Harold Wilson himself.
Tuesday, the 16th of March. This was a day of such momentous news that it's very difficult to know how to chronicle it. I went into the office early, and at 11 o'clock I went to the cabinet, and we all talked outside for a moment, and then went into the cabinet room. And Harold said, "Before we come to the business, I want to make a statement." And he then read us an 8-page statement in which he told us that he had irrevocably decided that he was going to resign the premiership and would stay just long enough for the Labour Party to elect a new leader. And people were stunned, and yet in a curious way, without emotion. Harold is not a man who arouses emotion in people. And I sat there listening quite impassively, and although other people were shocked and surprised because nobody knew it was coming, it was still a very remarkable sort of lack of feeling. When he'd finished, and he thanked us all, Jim Callaghan, and it was hard to conceal his excitement, said, "Harold, we shall never be able to thank you for your services to the movement." And so Harold got up and walked out of the cabinet, because he said he had to see Len Murray and then Cledwyn Hughes to tell them. And he walked out, and that was it.
BBC Radio News. We've just heard from our staff at Westminster that the Prime Minister, Mr. Harold Wilson, has resigned. He will continue as a backbencher. Mr. Wilson celebrated his 60th birthday.
And when he'd gone, Shirley said, "Don't you think we ought to formalise our thanks?" And Barbara said, "Yes, we should in some way." So Shirley and Barbara were sent out to write something. So we proceeded to the agenda, this time with Ted Short in the chair. And the tea was brought in. I got my blue and white mug, everybody else got their cups of tea and coffee. And I left Downing Street about 2 minutes to 1, and by this time there was a huge crowd of people and hundreds of cameras and television cameras. And I got into the car, went back to the office, and had the ministerial lunch.
Mr. Wilson, what led you to decide that 2 more years was enough?
In fact, the last 2 years have been more exciting and more productive than my previous 5 3/4 years. And of course we have now got, as I said, a very talented cabinet. I thought that because I could leave it all to them, I'd have more time off. On the contrary, I've had less time off. That Labrador of mine, who is still a Labrador Retriever, which is still in cartoons, poor devils, has only had about 3 walks down to the pub, where he likes going, on Saturdays or Sundays this year. It is a very, very full-time job. It's a sad moment in many ways, but you do feel a certain relief at the burden falling off your shoulder. As I say, a 7-day-a-week burden, particularly if you're confident that your successor will pick up that burden and carry out his duties in a fresh and interesting way.
While Harold was giving his press conference, I was back at the Department of Energy having the regular sandwich lunch with ministers, and we discussed why he'd gone, who would succeed him, what would happen. And then, of course, on to the House of Commons, where he had Prime Minister's questions.
And I went into the chamber and I sat on the front bench.